Emily Gordon, it's so lovely to spend this time with you. I've admired your work for many years as a clinical psychologist, especially with teens. And I knew this time would come when my daughter was old enough where I'm in it, middle school years, I'm in it. So
Mm,
the reason I want to speak to you today is look, Emily, we could speak all afternoon about the issues that teens are facing, right?
yes.
Anxiety, depression, the whole thing, right? However, I really want to park that conversation for the time because I've been in that a lot lately.
Okay.
And what I would love us to focus on is more what's working. What are
Yeah.
the success stories that are happening for teens right now? And really, how can we make a difference in this modern life that's messy and crazy that we live in, right? So to get started, please share with our community and I'm sure there's lots of things I'm going to learn too about you, about your background and how did you find yourself working with teens and helping them with their emotional regulation and resilience?
I'm super glad to be here. I actually remember I think I remember when we first met and you had your yoga books and your daughter was little. And so it's been a long time and it's so awesome to see kind of how you've grown and how your work has grown. So I'm super excited to be here. Means a lot to what you just said. And yeah, so to tell you a little bit about me, so I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I have a practice in Natick, Massachusetts, where I work in person. I'm also licensed in Massachusetts, so all over Massachusetts, in Vermont and in Florida, so I can work with people in those places. Um, and let's see, I like to say that I always knew I wanted to be a psychologist, but I never really understood or knew what it meant to be a psychologist until I actually started doing it.
Right.
So I think I just was always drawn to like connecting with people and listening and helping in some way. And more than that, maybe just like learning and understanding. That's one of the things I really love about this field is like there's just always
Mm,
more to learn and
mm,
ways to grow. So how did I get interested in teens? Well, I started out, in my clinical training, I started out in an outpatient clinic, a residential program, and a therapeutic day school for adolescents. And I just, I don't know, there's so much energy and there's so much like hope and positivity, and kids and teenagers are so creative, and it just sort of
mm,
feels like such an important time where kids or teens are like figuring out who they are and what's important to them. So I actually like the older teens where they have a little bit more insight and are really grappling with these questions and these issues. So after I graduated from school, I came back here to the Boston area. I started working at McLean in the adolescent residential day treatment program. I learned about DBT there, which is a lot, talks a lot about mindfulness and emotion regulation, distress tolerance. Um, and then, sort of an interest of mine was always working with girls and women and sort of empowerment and mental health and physical health. And so I ended up working in a program for treating adolescents with eating disorders. So I
mm,
kind of started out more generally working with adolescents and then went specifically more towards treating teens with eating disorders.
mm.
So that's, I guess, fast forward, I've had a private practice for over 20 years. It's almost 25
Wow.
and
Right.
work with lots of teens and young adults and adults of all ages because I guess to some
Right.
degree we're all still developing and learning.
Yes. And I think the last time we spoke too, you're really branching more out to working with the adults, right?
So I'm
Yeah.
really
Grown-ups.
yeah, I think one of the things I've learned over time is that um the kid so I've learned a couple things. One is that the kids who get better have adults in their lives that are invested.
Oh, interesting.
I
Yes.
generally speaking, right? So
Mm,
us are perfect. None of us are perfect parents. We
mm,
don't always know what to do, and we don't have to know what to do, but
yeah.
we have to just be present with our teenagers. We have to keep
Mm,
ourselves regulated, and we also have to know like when we need help uh,
yeah, right.
and what our plan is going to be.
Yeah.
Um, I can do a lot with a kid, even a kid that doesn't want to be here in my office. If the
Mm,
parent says, I know it's hard, but you gotta go.
Mm,
I can do something with that teenager. But if the teenager doesn't get here to my office, I can't do that much. Right.
right.
So one of the things, and I guess as I've become a parent of teens that are also getting older, it just feels so important, right? Like what is
Mm,
happening for teenagers and what is happening for parents, it just really matters. It matters for
mm,
their own well-being, it matters for our own well-being. And like
mm.
I say this and I it sounds big and dramatic, but like it really matters for the world. Because
Yes.
we in our side conversation before we started recording, right? Like there's lots of fires out there in the world.
Mm,
And we're gonna need we're gonna need this generation to really like figure it out.
mhm.
They got to figure out themselves and they got to figure out the world. So it really matters. So yeah, so I'm looking to do, just support parents and how to support their teens.
Yeah. I love the words you said there, and I think it's worth mentioning. You said the importance that you've seen is that the parent is invested or the caregiver
Yeah.
is invested. You didn't say that we have to have it all worked out.
No, no,
You
no.
didn't say that we need to be perfect. You didn't
Fact,
say
I said you
that,
probably won't.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think that to me feels like, whew, it just takes the relief.
Yeah.
I
Well,
can do that.
I have
Like
another
that I
word for you,
am.
right? Which is just to be
Yeah.
present.
To be present.
To be present, right?
Yeah.
Like, and to acknowledge we don't always have the answers, you know? I mean,
Mm,
people ask me questions all the time, and I say, "Well, I actually don't know about that. I'll have to think about it, right?" Or,
yeah.
we've had some discussions about social media, and, I don't have the answers, but I have
Yeah.
some ideas or I have some values. So, yeah, I think really, I think the teenagers these days, they just want to feel like are understood,
Mm,
like they're heard, um, and like what they feel and what they think matter, like that they matter.
And it may not show up how you want them to be looking, right? Like my daughter, she's on the couch when she gets home. And I don't love that, right? It's my values. Like I'm an active person. That's just who, but she has more of a kappa kind of energy. And so for her, the day is like white knuckling and she comes home and she's exhausted,
Yeah.
right? So it's hard also to be present and non-judgmental
Oh,
because
it sure is.
wowzers, the
It sure
judgment is there, even on a 13-year-old, right?
it is. Well, I look, it is. I mean, we could talk for hours about this. I would do what, I mean, I think what you said about what we can do and what's working is super important. But yes,
Mm,
um, there's got to be a middle ground, right?
mm,
Between our values and the things that matter to us and sort of what we're trying to teach and share and the kinds of people that we're trying to grow,
yeah.
with some tolerance and acceptance that, there's a lot of things we don't get to choose, that we don't get to decide. And we have to just accept and love anyway.
Yeah.
Because
So, okay, so
it's not
going
about
back to
us, it's about them.
right, right, right. I love that. It's not about us, it's about them. So talk me through. You've got these teenagers coming into your office, you're having some one-on-ones and also just people, your children's friends also. What are you finding are some strategies? Is there any commonalities or is it really not a one size fits all? Is there
It's
anything
definitely not a one size fits all. I
yeah.
mean, I think that's the cool thing is that there are really so many strategies and
Mm,
options. And, the more we learn, the more there is to learn, right? So, I think teenagers in particular, like creativity and
mm,
like if we think about the teenage brain and sort of what's happening, there's all these neurons and sort of connections that are growing and developing, and there is actually sort of a creative explosion that happens in the teenage years. Like there's a drive towards innovation and big ideas and big thinking. So any kind of creative expression, like art, music,
mm,
writing, um, cartoon, graphic design, like uh, there's just so many options for creative
mm,
expression. I think that teenagers want connection, right? They want sort of social connection, and there's all sorts of ways with all sorts of pros and cons, right? But there's lots of ways for teenagers to feel connection. Of course, that is one thing that is challenging for some teenagers who sort of don't feel connected. And but and then you know even better than I, right? There's all these sort of physical and mindfulness and movement types of strategies that I think kids are embracing.
Mm.
um
Yeah, I love that. So more of like creativity, connection, and really owning their own health and wellness,
yes.
right? Instead of us imposing on them, I mean, there's, like you said, there's so many options, even within the yoga world. And near to us, there's an not astro, acro, acro
Yeah,
yoga, right? Where you can
right,
the teenagers can get all bound up and
right.
it's
I
super fun,
mean,
right? And there's goats, and we're looking at cat yoga. I can't get my daughter to a yoga class, but possibly a cat yoga class,
oh,
right?
right, animals. I
So
mean,
the
animals is another great coping strategy.
Right,
Yeah,
right. Yeah, so you could
right.
actually bring those three things together, the connection, the creativity, and the health and wellness.
Yep. The other thing that I think is super important for teenagers is to feel not only like they matter, but that they have like a skill or a competence or something to
Mhm.
offer. And again,
Ooh,
it
yeah.
doesn't matter what it is.
Mm,
And in some ways, it's one of the downsides of our culture, right? Is that it feels like there's so much pressure and there's so many activities. But I think if we can take the perspective that there are just lots of options, and kids can get involved in drama or music or the arts or sports or student leadership or the newspaper or helping younger kids, like taking care of animals, right? There's so many activities
mm,
that if we do it carefully can add to kids' confidence and competence.
I love that. My daughter started a candle business with one of her neighbors last year, and then
Yeah,
we have local here. Actually, it's national here in the States. It's a children's business fair.
yeah,
Children's
I've seen
children's
that.
business fair.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
seen that.
But it's fantastic. What a great way. I think it's for, 13 or something and
Yeah,
younger, but what a great opportunity. They can feel like they've done something and people,
yes.
the
And they're learning
transaction.
valuable life skills while they do it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right, right, right. But as you say, it can be anything. I think sometimes also for some of our sort of neurodiverse children, it can be overwhelming the
yep,
choice. So
yep,
sometimes, as a parent, we have to kind of guide them along and kind of
absolutely.
help them to see, put the magnifying glass on what are the things that I like, you like to do,
Yes.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
excellent. So working with you, we're talking about the adults now, right? So you've got these great strategies working with the teens. But I no doubt that's got to be coupled with the self-regulation, the co-regulation of the grown-ups in
Yes.
the space, right?
Yes.
So what are you finding is kind of working in terms of working with grown-ups with self-regulation?
Well, um, well, so there's kind of different categories of grown-ups with regulation who are working on
Mhm.
self-regulation, right? Some
Mhm.
of the people that I work with are parents. And so one of the things that we're working on is how do you stay calm and regulated, right? When, you're feeling overwhelmed or scared, or when your kid is doing something, or when your teenager rolls their eyes or says, or so how do you stay calm and grounded through those storms that are happening in your house? How do we contain our own worry and our own fears and our own sort of ruminations about whatever it is that we are preoccupied with? So a lot of it is, and how are we modeling that in our relationships, with adults with other adults in the house? Um,
Yes.
that's
Yes, I
a
was going
big
to say
piece of
that.
it. Um,
Yeah.
so that's one part of what I'm working with adults on. Another thing that this is not related, but a lot of what I'm working on with adults is how to stay regulated in their work. or in
Mm,
the world when the world feels scary and overwhelming and like there's fires everywhere, right? I mean, a lot of what it's interesting, a lot of what people are bringing into sessions with me is challenges of getting along with people at work, bosses
mm,
who are difficult, feeling overwhelmed, right? So we're working on a lot of emotion regulation skills to kind of show up in all of the areas of our lives that we need to be grounded and regulated in.
right. And that means a lot actually, because we don't oftentimes, I've seen personally, I don't mean to throw my husband under the bus, but I'm throwing
Yeah.
him under the bus.
Yeah.
But I can see when he comes home from work, you can tell
Yeah.
that it's been a hard day. And
Yeah.
it's hard for folks like him to leave that at the door.
Yes.
Right. And so I think this is a very common, I hear from a lot of moms, right? How do we help our partners to regulate and it
Yeah.
comes and not react ourselves? And
Yeah.
so it's in this fierce commitment to our own regulation. It is hard,
It
Emily.
is really
It's
hard.
hard. It's easy to sit here and speak about different strategies, but really at the end, it is hard.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you walk away going, well, that didn't go so well.
Well, there's
You
a lot of
know?
things that there's a lot of not to throw your husband on the bus, but there's a lot of things that make that challenging, right? Is that we all have different levels of self-awareness and sort of
Mhm.
willingness to work on some of those issues. We have different levels of understanding or recognition of how important that is. And
Mm.
we have different levels of stress. I mean, I think that's one of the issues is that, I just think adults I just think it's a very stressful, difficult time to be a human being, whether you are an adult or whether you are a teenager. There's just so many pressures and stresses and unknowns and changes, right? And so it just is like, maybe your husband really had a difficult day or interaction with somebody, or maybe like people are just struggling in all sorts of ways, and so it's hard. um I think when I think about emotion regulation, I think it's about we sort of almost have to back up and talk about what is it that we're
Mm.
even talking about? Like, what is emotion regulation,
Yeah.
right? And it's the awareness and sort of recognition of what our feelings and emotions are. It's an understanding of where they come from.
Mm.
It's being able to put language to them, like being able to label those emotions. It's being able to express and communicate those things. And then it's being able to make a decision about what you are going to do about those emotions.
Mm. Yeah.
And there's no, again, there's no right way or right thing, and so that's where, again, this is challenging, because at any part of that process, you and somebody else may have different language, different
Mm.
ideas, different beliefs, different understanding. So I mean, it's hard enough to do it for one person, just yourself, never mind when you're trying to do it with or for another person, and then with a teenager or a child in the mix.
Yeah. So take us to, working with your grown-ups. Give us some ideas of some strategies that have
Yeah.
worked with some of your clients.
So um this is a very, very simple one, but I actually think this most simple one is the most powerful. The first thing I tell people is pause, take a
Awesome.
breath.
Yeah.
Right? We can't do anything when we are elevated, when we're in action, when we don't know what's going on. So the very first thing that we have to do is slow down and pause. And
Yeah.
then we assess, right? Then we can take a deep breath. And one of the things I love is just sort of pick something positive, or pick your favorite color, or pick
Mhm.
an emotion, and sort of say, okay, I'm going to breathe it in, and then breathe out something that you want to let go of. Right? I'm going to breathe out the stress, or I'm going to breathe out the fire, or I'm going to breathe out the red, whatever it is, sort of breathe in what you want more of and breathe out what you want less of.
Mm.
So that I start there. There's also, like take 5 minutes and get some fresh air, get some
Mm,
sunlight. It's been amazing the last week or two, right? If you've noticed that, like having sunlight and daylight in our afternoons, it makes such a difference. I even notice my shoulders are sort of
mm.
lower. So things like nature, sunlight, um, I mentioned my shoulders, like squeeze and then release.
Yeah.
Just things we can do in our physical body, I think are really can go a long way. Um, I also really like doing things that are sensory, right? Whether that's sound and music or like the sounds of the ocean or um, some smelling something or
Yes.
touching something. I think our babies were really onto something when they had like a sort of comfort object.
Yeah.
Um, so those are just some ideas.
Yeah, and what you're saying there too, Emily, is something that teenagers can do and educators can do in high school or
Yeah.
middle school,
Yeah.
right? Just
Anytime. I
taking a
mean,
pause.
right. These are
Yeah.
things that are available anytime. And the thing I tell people about a lot of the ones I just mentioned is like nobody has to know you're doing them.
Yeah, right.
Um, right. You can very subtly take a deep breath. You could close your eyes. You can like another one that I really like is just sort of putting your hand over your chest
Yeah.
or your heart, right? And just sort of like giving yourself some comfort, which is a little bit more obvious, but you could squeeze your hands together and just sort of feel the ridges in between your fingers.
Right.
So there's a lot of things you can tense and release. There's a lot of things you can do
Mm,
wherever you are.
right. And you could even do, a mantra or something
Yeah.
or something like an affirmation in your mind that no one
Yeah.
will know you're doing, right? Just something.
Well, and another thing so I have people that I work with who, we talk about like, so if you're sitting at your desk, I have, teenagers who will like write post-it notes, and they'll sort of put
Yeah.
a post-it notes around them.
Right.
You could, there's daily affirmation apps where you can listen to one, sort of play one for yourself daily. But knowing yourself and knowing like, do I want somebody else's voice? Do I want this?
Yeah.
Do I want to look at it? Do I want to hear it? Do I want to talk, do I want to say it to myself? Like what would be useful for me?
Mm.
Those are important things to ask and to know.
Yeah, I love that. So can you share a story with us of something that maybe a teen, maybe had a shift in what you were working on in terms of regulation?
Yeah. Well, so a lot of times, people come to therapy because they're using a strategy of regulation that maybe started out as a useful strategy, but it kind of took on a life of its own or became unhelpful. So,
Mm,
for me, a lot of the clients that I work with are either over-regulated in that they're restricting their intake, or they're dysregulated in that they're binging and purging or using substances or self-harm. Um, so I had a let me think. So I had a teenager that came in. He was using substances, a lot of weed, and it started as a social thing. It started as a way to feel connected, to calm down, and really started to get in the way of school and performance. And so, the very first thing that I said and I wasn't really sure how he was going to respond, but I said, like, what if you used less? Um, but we really had to tie that into the things that were important to him, like doing well in school, and feeling in control of, eating and body. And so it was awesome because as he was able to use less, we used some of these regulation strategies of understanding his feelings. And it was hard because we had some real difficult, painful feelings that came out, but
mm.
ultimately, um, kind of learned some better coping strategies.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
What if we could all take on that, right? what if we just did less?
Yeah.
Or the opposite of that, what if you just did more? So I think sometimes there's a lot of guilt of all the things that you should be doing. I saw this video the other day, as women especially, right? Like we're supposed to be doing the supplements and we have to exercise and mindfulness and drink water, like all these things, right? But what if we just took on this, 1% or 5%
Right.
more of something, or
The,
1% or 5% less of something, right? It
so the
doesn't have
thing
to be
that I
all
think
or nothing.
is important is like when we say that, right? What if we did less? Okay, so how are you going to manage when you do less?
Mm,
Right? Because the reason why you're doing more is because it fills something. It calms your anxiety, right? Or and so in that example, when we talked about what would it be like to use less substances, we actually talked about how he was going to do that
mm,
and what he was going to do when he had an urge to use. And so we had to talk about all of those things, which involved a lot of emotion regulation, right? How am I going to tolerate the feelings that come up when I am feeling left out of my friends, or when I'm feeling, sort of agitated, or how can I keep myself busy or feeling good in other ways? So you really have to like have a strategy to then tolerate whatever you're thinking about changing.
yeah. I love how you also hit it straight on. Instead of
Mm,
avoiding the issue, he's gonna be able to use that strategy for other areas in his
yes.
life.
Yes.
You're planting a seed for him to put in his little toolkit for the rest of his life. I mean, how often are we up against that,
Right.
right? Where we're not making the best decisions, and how do we cope with that?
How do we go with that? Well,
Mm,
I'm so glad you just used that word, toolkit, right? Because we need a toolkit.
mm,
And the thing about, and that's actually another strategy I use with teens all the time is, I mean, we use that word, and sometimes kids, even like younger kids, you sort of actually use a shoebox and you can
yeah,
put
right.
like items, right? Or mantras or reminders in that box.
Yeah.
Because, so like what we said before, there's no right answer, right? And
Mm,
different things work for different people, and different things work in different situations.
mm,
But the most important thing is that we actually have to work on these things before we need them so that the
mm.
toolkit
Yeah.
is available to us, right? Like I was thinking about this, and I remember, like, if we use the example of calling 911,
Mm,
right? You don't just wake up in an emergency and know to call 911. Like I remember having conversations with my kids, right, about how you would pick up the phone and how you would, and I remember we didn't practice calling 911 because that wouldn't work. But we would like practice picking up the phone, right, and dialing the numbers or showing them where the numbers were so that when they were in the situation of needing that, you can then call on it. And it's the same thing for all these emotion regulation skills, right? Like I talk with people about, could you try breathing
mm,
for 30 seconds or a minute or 5 minutes every day, right? Could you build that into your muscle memory? Could you build
mm,
that into your toolkit so that when you're in a situation where your body needs the breathing, it knows what to do? You're not trying to teach
mm.
it something in the crisis.
Yeah.
So
I love it.
I love the idea of toolkits and sort of having different options and practicing those options and thinking about what they're going to be in advance.
Yeah, I love that so much. So, to wrap this up, you've shared so many great ideas, right? So, if you had a magic wand, Emily,
Mm.
you're in the world not just with your clients, but you work online, you're seeing a lot of teens. If you had a magic wand, what would you say could possibly sort of shift how what's going on with our teens and their mental health? And maybe looking at kind of if we had a secret sauce to add to that toolkit, for example.
We have a secret sauce. That is an excellent question. Boy, do I wish I had a magic wand. Um, the thing that's coming to my mind is like space or like understanding. right? And
Mm,
awareness that teenagers have big feelings and we all have feelings, and that that's part of being human. And it's not about not having difficult feelings, it's about knowing what to do, having a language, having strategies around those feelings. So I feel like we all just need to take a collective deep breath and sort of exhale. Um, I generally am a fairly hopeful person, and so I some days it's challenging, but I try to just have hope in the future,
mm.
and space and like acceptance and understanding.
Yeah, I love that so much. Yeah, I love that so much. And knowing that in the classrooms that I was at, as a teacher substitute now,
Yeah,
when you see these children who are having these ginormous behaviors, or even my daughter's having big reactions, it is hard in the moment.
it
But as
really
you
is.
say, just to keep practicing and keep having grace for yourself, right?
Yeah,
And that you don't always have to have it perfect. You don't
yeah,
always remember to take the deep breath, but as
right.
you say, this tolerance and acceptance and just keep getting back out there, right? And acknowledging your own feelings, modeling
Well,
for our
yeah,
teens, right?
it's going to be hard to wrap up, but and also what you just said, really, like, you never know what someone else is dealing with either,
Mm, mm,
right? And sort of, so having grace for yourself and having grace for other people,
mm,
and other kids, and sort of, so, the idea of like, how do we teach this, and how do we have schools that are, sort of safe and supportive. um Whole other topic for a whole other day, but sort of recognizing that emotions are a part of it,
yeah.
and that people are doing the best they can.
Yes, I love that. And back to that idea of investing, right? That the children that we need to invest in them, right? Invest in ourselves and
Yeah.
each other as grown-ups, help each other invest in the children. So, what resources do you recommend out there in the world for working with teens and,
Oh,
even
there's
as families and
so many good
educators?
ones. So specifically as it like relates to emotion regulation, right? There's a lot of apps that I've been using. So I
Mm,
can maybe send you some, I don't know if you do show notes, but
yes.
I can send you
Yes.
some. Some
Yeah.
of the ones I like are like the, sort of Calm, Headspace, and Insight Timer. But there's a couple that are unique for teenagers. One is called Smiling Mind. The other
Okay.
called Happify. And then there's
Mm.
another new app, it's called Be Me, and it's specifically about teens and mental health. So,
Oh,
like all of
interesting.
those apps, um, I like, there's a ton of books, that I have been reading and sort of find useful. Specifically, I just think understanding the teenage brain, like we have to start there from just understanding like what is happening. And the two that I really like, one is called Brainstorm by Dan Siegel, and the
Mhm.
other one is called The Teenage Brain, written by Frances Jensen. She's a neuropsychologist.
All right.
So I like those. And then there's a few others. Shift by Ethan Kross is one I just came across, just about understanding emotions. So
Right.
there's so many good resources out there. I think that's
Right.
what's kind of inspiring and exciting.
Yeah, I love what you're talking about there too, about understanding the brain. There's so much great brain research, right? And I feel like that is a way for me to connect with my husband on the
Yep.
scientific level because he's very scientifically
Yep.
minded. So instead, if I'm sharing with him this, Permission to Feel by Dr. Mark Brackett,
Yep.
that's
That's also on my
not,
list.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
not always it's much easier for me to talk about, like a book like The Female Brain. I read that years ago. I wonder if
Yep.
it's, yeah, but just having that someone to revisit again, but looking at the teenage years, or I was reading Untangled, I think it's
Yep.
for
Lisa
teenage
DeMore, all of
girls.
her, all of her resources are excellent just on
Yeah.
adolescents and teenagers in general. Right. So
So
there's a
that's
lot
good
of
to
books.
science.
There's a lot of, like, we touched on this again, but like a lot of podcasts that are out there, both
Right.
from all different perspectives. So, yeah, but I think as it relates to teens and keeping ourselves regulated, like we have to
Mhm.
know what is going on in our teenagers so we can understand them, so that we can have reasonable expectations, so that we can help them work on the skills that they need to develop. Um, yeah.
Yeah. And like you said, it's not about us. It's not personal. They're going through their own journeys, right? Yeah. So how can we find you online and what are you
Yeah, so you
working
can
on?
find me at my website, dremilygordon.com. I am on LinkedIn. I just started actually a new newsletter that you can find on my website.
Mhm.
That's going to be, the name of it is called Growing Together. It's about parents and parenting teens.
Oh,
And
great.
I have a new Instagram, which is
Oh,
also
great.
Dr. Emily Gordon, which is a work in progress. But I'm trying to put out some useful information.
Yes. And you're not just clinic based too. I think last time we spoke, you're starting to branch out into doing more speaking to groups. I think you did that in this local
Yes.
area. So you're
Thank you for
open.
asking. Yes. So I'm in
Yeah. So you're,
practice. I'm
yeah.
actually in the fall, I'm hoping to start some parenting groups for different groups of parents. I just started a
Mhm.
talk series based on books for adolescents.
Oh, great.
And yes, I really have been enjoying and really find it so important and essential to talk and to educate parents and educators. So I am available for speaking, for coming to schools, talking to educators, talking to guidance departments, anybody who works with teens. I'd love to talk and contribute.
I love it. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for your time,
Thank you so
Emily.
much for
So
having me.
appreciate
It's
you.
always lovely to
Thank
talk with
you.
you.
Thank you.